Jim Caviezel was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood at the start of the 2000s. He starred in hit movies that typically grossed over $90 million, like The Thin Red Line and The Count of Monte Cristo.
Let's get this quilt done. Alright. I found my pins that has the numbers on it, and I am so glad. Now, when I stopped last night, I put pins on each one of them, like we have 1, 2, 3, and so forth, so that way I could keep them in a line. So now we're going to work on trying to put the strip. I figured that I'd have to have all three for the to do all of these, but I only needed 2, and so that's good. All right, now what I want to do is I want to see how many of these that I need. So I only cut. Oh yeah, that works good. And then so what I'm gonna do is line these out, and I'm glad I have over because that's what I like. I'm gonna line these out and count how many I need, and then we'll go cut them. Alright, from the looks of it, I only need 2. Oh yeah, I need to finish these up. I have the name of it on here so that I can keep up with them. But I gotta find me some envelopes. Envelopes. Alright, so we only need 2. See if I can line this up and cut 2 more, and then we can continue on. I need to take those pins out. Boy, that's gonna be it. I don't think I want that big of a lining, so I'm gonna have more of this left over to use. Alright, let's go see what we can do about finishing this up.
Jim Caviezel was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood at the start of the 2000s. He starred in hit movies that typically grossed over $90 million, like The Thin Red Line and The Count of Monte Cristo. But all of a sudden, that disappeared. How is that even possible? Although it seemed like he was on track for a long and successful career, something changed after he took on one unforgettable role. And many of us know the role. It was the role of Jesus Christ in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. Can you imagine? You want to know what's crazy? Mel Gibson warned him. When Jim was offered the role of Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ, it wasn't a decision to be taken lightly. Mel Gibson, the director of the film, knew this better than anyone. Before Jim accepted, Gibson pulled him aside for a serious conversation. He didn't sugarcoat the situation. He told Jim, "If you take this role, you'll never work in this town again." This wasn't a casual warning. Gibson was fully aware of the controversy surrounding the film, even before it was released. He knew that playing such a significant and polarizing figure could put Jim in the crosshairs of Hollywood criticism and public scrutiny. Many actors might have hesitated or even backed out after hearing something like that. But Jim's response was immediate and unwavering. He later recalled his words to Gibson, saying, "We all have to embrace our crosses." For Jim, this wasn't just a career decision, it was a calling. He believed deeply in the message of the story and felt that this role wasn't something he could turn down, no matter the cost. Taking on the role of Jesus wasn't just about acting for Jim. It was about faith, conviction, and a willingness to sacrifice his reputation in Hollywood for something greater. He once said, "We have to give up our names, our reputations, our lives to speak the truth." These words capture the heart of his decision. Mel Gibson's prediction wasn't far off. After The Passion of the Christ was released, the film became a cultural phenomenon, but also a lightning rod for controversy. For Jim, the consequences of his choice were almost immediate. Hollywood turned its back on him, and many filmmakers who once saw him as a rising star now viewed him as too risky to cast. But Jim didn't regret his decision. Instead, he leaned on his faith, fully embracing the role and its impact on his life. After Passion of the Christ hit theaters in 2004, it became one of the most talked about films in the world. It shattered expectations, grossing over $600 million worldwide on a modest budget, and was praised by many for its raw and faithful retelling of the final hours of Jesus' life. But for Jim, who delivered a powerful and deeply emotional performance, the story wasn't as simple as critical acclaim or box office numbers. The film didn't just divide audiences, it divided Hollywood. While many fans celebrated his portrayal of Christ, the industry's reaction wasn't as warm. Hollywood has long been known for its complex relationship with faith-based films, especially ones as direct and unflinching as The Passion. Some in the industry labeled the film too controversial, too polarizing, and by association, Jim became a controversial figure as well. One thing was clear: Jim wasn't seen the same way in Hollywood anymore. Before The Passion, he had been a rising star with roles in big productions. After The Passion, the calls from major studios slowed down, and he found himself on the outside, looking in. Jim later reflected on this, saying he didn't mind the change. He was willing to sacrifice his career to be part of the story. In his own words, Jesus is as controversial now as he's ever been. Not much has changed in 2,000 years. He understood that playing Christ meant he might never play another big Hollywood role, but to him, it was worth it. However, if you think Jim is a great Christian, I promise you that you will not expect what he did next in Hollywood. He single-handedly faced one of Hollywood's standards. In Hollywood, romance sells. Love scenes are often a key ingredient in making films appeal to a wide audience. But for Jim, drawing boundaries around on-screen intimacy wasn't just a professional choice, it was a deeply personal one, rooted in his faith. Jim made it clear early in his career that he wouldn't participate in explicit love scenes. He told the New York Post in 2002, "I have a hard time getting naked on film. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's right. In my faith, I'm taught that abstinence is important." One of the most notable examples of this was during the filming of Angel Eyes, a romantic drama where Jim starred alongside Jennifer Lopez. From the start, Jim had certain conditions for the love scene. He said, "Put a top on her. I'm going to keep my shorts on. She's going to keep hers on." This wasn't about being difficult. It was about respect. Jim explained that this decision was out of devotion to his wife. He wanted to honor their relationship and stay true to his beliefs, even in an industry where such boundaries are rare. Similarly, during the filming of The Count of Monte Cristo, Jim took his co-star Dagmara Dominčík aside to talk about his boundary. She later recalled him saying, "I'm married and very faithful." Her response? "Jim, it's a Disney movie." While they joked about it, Jim's commitment to his values was clear. Jim's conservative approach to on-screen intimacy set him apart in Hollywood. but it also made it harder for him to land certain roles. In an industry where chemistry and physical connection between characters are often seen as crucial, his unwillingness to cross certain lines could be seen as a limitation. But for Jim, these boundaries weren't about fitting into Hollywood's mold. While his choices may have limited the roles he was offered, they also earned him respect from those who shared his values. Jim showed that it's possible to work in Hollywood without compromising your beliefs, even if it means taking the road less traveled. Fame. It's something many people dream of. The applause, the recognition, the feeling of being adored by millions. But what happens when the applause fades? What happens when your name isn't in the headlines anymore? Jim has seen the fleeting nature of fame firsthand. He often talks about the emptiness of worldly recognition and contrasts it with something far greater, God's eternal Hall of Fame. He shared this thought-provoking message. This crowd on earth, they will soon forget when you're not at the top. They will cheer like mad until you fall, and then their praise will stop. Not God. He never does forget. And in his Hall of Fame, by just believing in his Son, forever there's your name. Think about that for a moment. Down here, the world celebrates you when you're successful, when you're popular, when you're winning. But as soon as you stumble, as soon as you're no longer useful to them, they forget you. The same people who once cheered for you might even turn against you. But not God. He doesn't care about how many followers you have on social media or how many awards you've won. He cares about your heart. When you believe in his Son, when you give your life to him, your name is written in heaven forever. That's the Hall of Fame that truly matters. Jim's words remind us to keep our eyes on what lasts forever. Earthly fame fades, but God's approval never does. Here's another part of Jim's message that really drives this home. I wouldn't trade my name, however small, that's written there beyond the stars in that celestial hall, for all the famous names on earth or the glory that they share. I'd rather be an unknown here and have my name up there. Jim's perspective challenges us to think about what we're living for. Are we chasing after the approval of the crowd, or are we living for the approval of God, the only one whose opinion truly matters? In a world that often measures success by applause and trophies, Jim's message is a powerful reminder to look beyond the temporary and focus on the eternal. After all, what good is it to gain the world but lose your soul? Jim doesn't just talk about Jesus, he talks about him boldly, without fear of what the world thinks. He reminds us that faith in Christ isn't meant to be hidden or watered down. It's meant to shine, even when it costs us everything. Jim quoted, "The Bible is alive right now. We're all playing different characters. I got to play Jesus. Some of us are playing Judas. Many of us are politicians. You see, there's good and there's evil, but most people, they're on the fence." Jim's words cut straight to the heart. He warns us about the danger of staying neutral. He says, there's a fight for that middle ground, the people who haven't yet chosen a side. Will they stand with Jesus, or will they drift away? He challenges us to ask ourselves, are we willing to stand for Christ, no matter what it costs us? Or will we choose comfort and avoid the fight? Jim doesn't just speak about Jesus. He lives for him, even in the face of rejection. Jim quoted, "I saw what John the Baptist did. I think about him all the time in this situation. Would you lose your head for Christ? Would you? I would, because I love him." These words aren't just for Jim, they're for all of us. Would we stand firm, even if it cost us everything? Would we declare our love for Jesus in a world that mocks him? Jim's answer is clear. He says, I love him, and I would give my life for him. Jim reminds us that standing with Jesus isn't always easy. He knows what it's like to be mocked and misunderstood. He's faced ridicule for his faith, and yet he stands firm, saying, I don't care what people think. My faith in Jesus is worth it all. Jim said, the Bible says, be holy, be perfect, just as my Father in heaven is perfect. That's not just a suggestion. That's the call for every believer. To be holy, to be set apart, to stand for Christ, even when it costs us. Jim's boldness is a call to action for all of us. He's not just asking, do you believe? He's asking, will you act on that belief? Will you stand with Jesus, no matter the cost? In today's world, speaking openly about faith can be like walking into a storm. And Jim knows this all too well. He's faced criticism, mockery, and outright rejection for being vocal about his love for Jesus. People have called him names, questioned his mental health, and tried to dismiss him entirely. But how does Jim respond? He doesn't retaliate or lash out. Instead, he smiles and says this, I just love Jesus. I'll give him whatever I've got. It's not my career, it's God's career. People can call me crazy, but I don't care. I love him. Jim's reaction shows us something powerful. True faith isn't shaken by what others say. It's rooted in love. Love for Jesus, the one who faced ridicule and rejection long before us. Jim often reminds us that Jesus was mocked, spit on, and nailed to a cross. If our Savior endured this for us, how can we let a few harsh words silence our faith? And Jim doesn't stop there. He challenges us to reflect on our own lives. Are we willing to stand firm in our faith when the world turns against us? Are we willing to be called crazy for Jesus? Around the world, Christians are persecuted every day. Jim's words remind us that our faith should be bold, unshaken, and public, even when it's hard. He says, I'm not ashamed of Jesus. I never will be. It's easy to stay silent, isn't it? To avoid criticism, to blend in. But Jim's example shows us that silence isn't an option. Faith isn't just a private belief, it's a public declaration. And when we choose to declare it, yes, the world may mock us. But remember this, Jesus said, Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. We live in a world that feels more divided and chaotic than ever. People argue over politics, beliefs, and lifestyles. It's easy to feel like something bigger is going on, something we can't fully see. Jim points out exactly what that is. A spiritual battle that has been raging since the beginning of time. In one of his interviews, Jim explains what the devil's role is in this battle. He says, what does the devil mean? It means divider. Satan accuses us, pointing out our sins, but God never gives up on us. He sent his Son to save us. Jim explains how the devil works to tear us apart. He divides families, communities, and even our own hearts. He whispers lies, convincing us that we're not good enough or that God doesn't care. But that's where Jim's message hits home. God is always fighting for us, even when we can't see it. Jim reminds us that we're not fighting against people, but against spiritual forces that want to pull us away from God. He says, every time we sin, we deny him. And every time we choose selfishness, pride, or fear, we give the enemy a foothold. The battle Jim talks about isn't just happening somewhere far away. It's happening right here, in our homes, schools, and hearts. He points out that many people are stuck on the fence, afraid to take a stand. He warns that this middle ground won't last forever. And for those who think they're not in the battle, Jim has another wake-up call. He says, "The fight is over that middle third. I'm going to take as many of these middle third with me as I can." Jim sees this fight as a chance to bring people back to God. He's not just talking about pastors or missionaries, he's talking about you and me. We're all called to be part of this spiritual army, to stand up for our faith, and to bring others along with us. But here's the beautiful part of Jim's warning. We're not fighting alone. God is with us every step of the way. He's given us His Word, His Spirit, and His promise that we don't have to be afraid. The question is, will we take up the fight? Or will we let the enemy win by staying silent, passive, and afraid? Jim's challenge is clear. Stand firm, love boldly, and trust that God is greater than anything we face in this world. This isn't just Jim's battle, it's ours. And the time to choose is now. Jim's story about how God called him is simple, yet incredibly powerful. It all started in a movie theater. At a moment when he felt lost, God spoke to his heart. Jim says it was a moment he will never forget. Here's how Jim described it. "God came to me in a movie theater. I felt like I was His only child. I never knew how much He loved me until that moment. Then He said, 'I'd like you to be an actor.' I didn't believe in myself, but I believed in Him. And if God believes in me, then I can do anything." Think about that for a moment. Here was a young man, unsure of his purpose, crying out to God for direction. And when God gave him an answer, he didn't hesitate. He didn't let self-doubt stop him. Instead, he leaned into the faith that God had a plan for his life. Jim took that leap of faith, and it led him to play one of the most challenging roles in film history, Jesus Christ. It wasn't easy. He faced criticism, physical suffering, and even moments of fear. But through it all, he trusted in God's purpose for his life. Jim once shared how he felt during one of the most grueling scenes in The Passion. "I was so cold. I was shaking. My shoulder was dislocated and I could barely stand. But I remembered that this wasn't about me. It was about Jesus. It was about telling His story. And in that moment, I prayed, 'God, give me the strength to keep going.' And He did." Jim's story reminds us that trusting God doesn't mean life will be easy. It means that even when things are hard, we have a strength that comes from beyond ourselves. When we lean on God, we can do things we never thought possible. He says, "I don't believe in myself. I believe in God. And if He gives me a task, then I do it." Jim's trust in God is an example for all of us. He reminds us that when God calls us to do something, our job isn't to figure it all out. It's to say yes, because God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Think about your own life. Is there something God is calling you to do? Maybe it feels too big, too scary, or too impossible. But remember Jim's words. If God believes in me, then I can do anything. And if God believes in you, what's stopping you from stepping out in faith? Jim's message ends with a profound reminder. The applause of this world is temporary, but the approval of God is eternal. Think about it. On earth, people chase fame, wealth, and recognition. They want their names in bright lights, in history books, or on trophies. But what happens when the applause stops? when the lights fade and the crowd moves on to someone else. Jim says it so beautifully. Your name may not appear down here in this world's Hall of Fame. In fact, you may be so unknown that no one knows your name. But don't forget, God has rewards He'll hand out someday. In God's Hall of Fame, your name can be written forever, not for how many followers you had or how many awards you won, but for one simple act, believing in His Son, Jesus. That's all it takes to secure your name in eternity, not just for a season or a generation, but forever. And here's the amazing part. You don't have to be rich, powerful, or famous to have your name written in heaven. God doesn't care about your resume or your achievements. He looks at your heart. Are you willing to trust Him? Are you willing to believe in Jesus and follow Him? This crowd on earth, they will soon forget when you're not at the top. They will cheer like mad until you fall, and then their praise will stop. Not God. He never does forget. And in His Hall of Fame, by just believing in His Son, forever, there's your name. Imagine this. Your name, however small or unknown here on earth, is written in heaven. It's written beyond the stars, in a place where no one can erase it. It's written by the hand of God Himself. That's the kind of fame that matters, the kind that lasts for eternity. Jim's words remind us to shift our focus from temporary things to eternal ones. The world may mock you. They may say you're crazy, just like they said about Jim, but God sees you. So, what will you choose? Will you chase after the praise of men, or will you pursue the approval of God? Jim chose the latter, and he's urging us to do the same. I wouldn't trade my name, however small, that's written there beyond the stars in that celestial hall, for all the famous names on earth or the glory that they share. I'd rather be unknown here and have my name up there. This is the promise God offers to each of us. Your name can be written in His book, sealed for eternity. All you have to do is believe in His Son and follow Him. Fame on earth will pass away, but your place in God's Hall of Fame will never fade. That's the reward that matters most. Let's not trade eternal treasures for temporary applause. Choose Jesus, stand firm in your faith, and know that your name is written where it truly counts.
Thomas Sowell said this best. He goes, politicians like to talk about solutions when in reality what they're offering you is trade-offs. So from a criminal perspective, your trade-off is you are hoping that if you restrict my ability to own a gun, that it will reduce the number of gun-related deaths on this side of the ledger. But what I can guarantee will happen, these people will now be disarmed because they're going to follow the law. When the drunk boyfriend comes over, he beats her to death, he doesn't get scared away by a gun. Are you going to bear any responsibility for the people that have now been hurt because you denied them their right to be able to defend themselves? And if you deny somebody access to their right, and they get hurt as a result of it, you bear responsibility for it. Now, if you protect somebody's right and they misuse it, you don't bear responsibility for that. They misuse their right. They now need to be punished for it. If my ability to defend myself or any of my rights, if those civil liberties are completely dependent on whether or not somebody else abuses theirs, then they're not rights anymore. They're simply privileges. Is that really the sort of society you want to live in? Because it's not if what you said causes violence. And so you don't get your freedom of speech anymore.
Yeah, it's not a free society at that point.
Oh no, here's Brian again with more fear and outrage porn. But you gotta admit, what's going on today in America with regard to American law enforcement or American policing is outrageous, and we need to call as much attention to it as possible. The thing that I'm specifically referring to right now is one of the last videos by the civil rights lawyer where we got this guy named Lanny and his son, I think it's Darren or Daryl Fentress, and their house catches on fire because I guess a lithium-ion battery exploded. The cops arrive on the scene. The Litchfield, Kentucky Police Department arrive on the scene before the fire department gets there. The cops aren't trying to put out the fire. Lanny is worried that his house is going to burn down. So while the cops are there and smoke is everywhere, Lanny wants to go back into his house so he can extinguish the fire so his house doesn't burn down. But the Litchfield Police Department says, hey, you can't go back in there. He's like, what are you talking about? It's my house. I don't want it to burn down. I got a vested interest in it not burning down for me and my family. I'm going back in there, and I'm going to extinguish the flame. They grab him, beat him up. His face looked like it went through a hamburger grinder, and they arrest the guy. If you are not free to extinguish a flame in your own house to keep your home from burning down in America, you are not free. I don't know what goes through the minds of these cops when they're saying, no, you can't cross that street. It's for your safety. You got to put on your seatbelt for your safety. And if you don't keep yourself safe, well, we're going to come and beat the holy hell out of you. What the hell is wrong with you? Psychologically speaking, I gotta think, people are like, do psychopaths become cops or do cops become psychopaths?